All right, we'll call to order the Planning Commission meeting of Thursday, March 21st. Let's start off with roll call, please.
Chair Dennison.
Here.
Vice Chair Pefsner.
Here.
Commissioner Moran.
Here.
Commissioner Simcock. Commissioner Yu.
Here.
All right, next up is the approval of the agenda. Would somebody like to move approval of the agenda?
I move to approve the agenda as is.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Next up are the approval of the minutes of March 7, 2024. Does anybody have any updates, additions, corrections, changes they'd like to see? Hearing none, I'll look for a motion to approve as presented.
So moved.
Seconded.
All those in favor? Aye.
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 I was not there, so.
Any abstentions?
All right.
All right. That motion carries. Next up is our council liaison report. Councilmember Lowe.
Hello, good evening, Planning Commission and Chair Dennison. We had a very long meeting the other night, and we really tried to go through the different CUPs and TUPs that we have in Sierra Madre, and we ended up dividing out, trying to analyze how we're addressing TUPs in Sierra Madre right now, and how we're addressing different groups like nonprofits, and what happens if a TUP goes away or a CUP becomes the reigning ordinances. And so we really are looking to you to try to distinguish what's coming and what's valid and comparable to our neighboring cities, as well as what's good for Sierra Madre, and from hearing from our neighbors. So we're hoping that you guys have a worthy discussion, and we get to hear from all of the participants tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Lowe. All right, at this time, any person may address the Planning Commission concerning an item that is not on the agenda. The Commission welcomes your attendance and participation. When addressing the Commission, please begin by providing your name and address for the record. Please keep comments to no more than 3 minutes to assure an orderly and timely meeting. In the event that you are here to speak on behalf or against a particular body that has to do with our agendized TUP section, please hold all comments till then. This section is for items that are not agendized. Hearing no general comments, we will move on. At this time, our only item tonight is a discussion of temporary use permits. Does city staff have a presentation for us?
We do. Planner Wolf will deliver a presentation.
Thank you.
Good evening, Planning Commission. Tonight's discussion is about temporary use permits ordinance, and before I begin the discussion, I would like to mention that through this process, staff is not only welcoming public participation, we are encouraging it. Anyone who would like to receive updates about when the Planning Commission or City Council will be holding meetings about temporary use permits or about home occupations is being asked to email staff. You can email myself at jwolf@sierramadreca.gov, jwolf@sierramadreca.gov, or jwolf@cityofsierramadre.com. Anyone interested can also stay updated by visiting www.sierramadreca.gov/TUP2024 or by scanning the QR code shown on the screen. The staff report can be digitally accessed by scanning the QR code on the left. If you would like to follow along in this presentation, you can do so by scanning the QR code on the right. So I'll go ahead and give people a minute to scan that if they'd like to follow along. Just let me know if you want me to go back to the slide. So tonight's discussion will be focused on two questions. The first is, should commercial uses be permitted in residential zones through a temporary use permit? If the commission decides that yes, commercial uses should be permitted through temporary use permit, the question then is to what degree should temporary commercial uses be permitted in residential zones? If not, the Planning Commission should recommend an ordinance amending the temporary use permits ordinance that prohibits any commercial use in residential zones. The second question, in either case, what is a commercial use and what measures are available that can be verified through enforcement? For background, the Planning and Community Preservation Department is tasked to administer the temporary use permits ordinance, which are governed under Chapter 17.88 of the Sierra Madre Municipal Code. Conditions of approval are often placed for each permitted temporary use on a case-by-case basis. Approvals for temporary uses are made on a subjective finding under Section 1788-050, where the director is the decision maker. And some findings there are quite odd. The first being a reasonable use of the land, given the context of the general plan, land use, and zone. Now I say odd because this is a temporary use for a use that is otherwise not permitted under the zoning code. The second being the temporary use will not impede the reasonable use of land or the orderly development of the land in the immediate vicinity. And again, this is a temporary use. It typically does not last more than 1 day. So this finding would almost always be found, where the very odd case would be in terms of frequency. So approvals of temporary use permits also come with notice to neighbors within a 300-foot radius of the site. This does come at an additional cost recovery of $419, or where the application fee is already set at $169. For code enforcement, typically, TUPs are issued for residential addresses that take place on weekends or other days when city staff would be unable to respond. Complaints are received and filed, but are often lacking in terms of dates and times of when an event took place, and anonymous complaints only log the dates and times of the complaint received. Police and fire enforce Titles 9 and 10, which include the noise ordinance, and specifically Chapter 9.52 governs response costs for loud parties, gatherings, and events. Chapters 10.24 governs the on-street parking rules, and Chapter 10.32 includes a schedule of streets to which there may be restrictions of use. On October 13th, 2022, was the effective date of ordinance number 1458, which was the last substantive amendment to the temporary use permits ordinance. This led to misinterpretation that uses exempted under the temporary use permit ordinance are allowable uses. It caused a hike in fees associated with temporary use permits due to the cost recovery to notify neighbors. And numerous complaints were received regarding frequency and on-street parking impact of activity conducted per exemption. On March 12, 2024, City Council meeting discussed and provided direction, to provide direction on temporary use permits standards by zone, a reconsideration for criteria for noticing to neighbors, ensuring that the temporary use permit does not permit continuous use or imply authorization of illegal use without permit, and to find measurable and enforceable ways to regulate commercial and non-commercial uses. The exemptions we talk about here and the misinterpretations come from section 17.88.020, subsection D. The following temporary uses, among others, are exempt from a permit. The first is small events, which are gatherings for less than 25 people. And the second is for house parties, which are private, non-commercial gatherings of up to 75 people. And a note from the staff perspective here is it is difficult to verify, or rather enforce, based on a number of people gathering. It is impossible to discern whether an event that has taken place was non-commercial or commercial. There is no standard definition for commercial or non-commercial. So again, this discussion, I'd like to bring up these questions again. Should commercial uses be permitted in residential zones through a temporary use permit? And in either case, what is a commercial use and what measures are available that can be verified through enforcement? Should no commercial uses be allowed through a temporary use permit, there are other means by which some level of commercial use may be permitted in a residential zone, such as by conditional use permit. So again, temporary use permits, they allow the city to authorize a use on private property that is otherwise not consistent with the permanently entitled authorized use applicable to the property. And these QR codes here are direct links to the municipal code of the permitted uses for R1 residential canyon and residential hillside zones. In the R1 zone, permitted uses that may be construed as commercial include home occupations, agricultural, including the wholesale of agricultural goods, transitional and supportive housing, and family daycare homes. In the residential canyon zone, this would include only home occupations, transitional and supportive housing, and family daycare homes. And in the residential hillside zone, this would include only home occupations, garage sales, and transitional and supportive housing. Also, I brought this up with City Council meeting that a strict interpretation of the uses permitted would prohibit visitors in any number for any reason from visiting the property unless otherwise expressly stated as a permitted use, where the language reads, use by but one family. In the R2 zone, the same uses as R1 are permitted. And then in the R3, 13, and moving on to R320 and R330, the uses would only include transitional and supportive housing, residential care facilities, and family daycare homes. But it's also worth noting that much of, but not all of, the R3, 13, 20, and 30 zones may be overlaid by the residential entrepreneur zone that allows for offices, professional services. Staff is suggesting the Planning Commission prepare an ordinance amending the temporary use permits ordinance, which first addresses the exemptions for small events and house parties, determines whether temporary commercial uses may be permitted by a temporary use permit and to what extent, that enhances the standards for duration and frequency, adds standards for noise, lighting, and parking, modifies when an event monitor may be required, modifies when noticing to neighbors would be required, distinguishes sensitive properties and creates special standards for them, and codifies standards for conditions of approval. If the Planning Commission decides that a temporary use permit cannot permit a commercial use in a residential zone, not all of these standards may need to be included in an amendment. The alternatives for Planning Commission tonight are to direct staff to initiate a municipal code text amendment. This would thereby initiate an ordinance. Second, to direct staff to prepare a resolution of policy interpretation on what, more specifically, is exempted as a small event and house party. Continue the discussion optionally requesting staff provide additional information. Form a subcommittee to study temporary use permitting. Take action in any combination of the above, or take any action of their preference. So again, the community is welcome to participate through this whole process. And again, that's through, if you would like to receive updates, I do email a lot of people about these updates on a normal basis. You can email me if you'd like to be included in that list. That's jwolf@sierramadreca.gov or jwolf@cityofsierramadre.com. You can also stay informed yourself by visiting sierramadreca.gov/TUP2024. That concludes my presentation.
Are there any questions of staff?
Go ahead.
I want to go back to the fee schedule. You're saying that all this noticing, the application ends up being, because I noticed in the document, I'm having trouble looking at it, but it mentions block parties, because you said the application for one is $169 and the noticing is like $419, right?
That's
So then
correct.
if you change the standard, the noticing fee goes up.
That's correct.
And so, does that mean we have a standard for that, or is that, I mean, is that a capricious amount that just becomes open-ended if we have to extend that noticing? I mean, because this is a fixed fee, someone comes in, pays a fee, expects something to happen. and then they say, oh, no, you gotta pay $200 more because the noticing is more difficult. Is that the idea?
There are 2 tiers of noticing. The first tier is for administrative types of review to notice neighbors. The second is for higher level reviews for planning commission and city council reviews.
But what triggers that? I mean, someone comes in for an application for some kind of temporary use permit, and you come and say, oh, well, you have to pay this application fee. Before they pay the $419 for the average regular noticing, if something comes up, then you tell them, okay, no, this has to go before the planning commission or something like that, and then there's gonna be additional fees?
All temporary use permit applications, their approval requires notice to the public.
Right, but prior to that, that flat fee isn't flat unless if something comes up and the director says, there's special circumstances here, we need to send this to the planning commission before we even approve it, correct?
Correct. If staff determines that the application needs to be elevated to the planning commission, the noticing fee can increase.
And that's the director's discretion, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Questions?
I have a question. Can you give me some examples of in the past, what have the TUPs been used for? What kind of events or?
So just across the street from City Hall, there's a native plant nursery. That's a pop-up being operated under a temporary use permit.
Okay.
St. Rita's Harvest Festival operates under a temporary use permit. And then various residential properties often host things like cultural celebrations, weddings, all sorts of things in residential properties.
So for example, the Wisteria Festival, when they went to the house and stuff, did they require something like that, or is that already built into that?
It's exempt through association with a special event.
Got it, okay.
So you mentioned that, sorry, did you have any questions? You mentioned that the noise complaints, because these events happen on the weekend, they just get received and filed, but I thought that the code currently requires for a TUP for there to be a monitor on site. So are you saying that the noise complaints get filed with the monitor, and then the monitor files with the city and nothing happens during the event to control the noise?
That would be the idea when such event would require a monitor, and there is a monitor, but there are events being conducted by exemption, which do not even require a permit. Or that's actually questionable.
Okay, so what you were saying is that the events that are happening where people are claiming the exemption are not being monitored, and so complaints are just falling by the wayside because of that.
Correct.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Any other questions of staff?
And the interface with the police, their jurisdiction only has to do with the noise and the on-street parking, not the event itself?
They would respond to complaints of loud parties or gatherings, and the offender would receive a citation on the second visit within 24 hours.
So, I mean, they can enter the property, say, hey, it's too loud. If you don't make some adjustments and we come back, there's going to be a citation of some sort. I don't know.
Chief Barrientos, would you like to
I
comment?
don't want to speak for the police, but yeah, just tell me what the normal procedure is, I guess. And where your jurisdiction ends, or doesn't end.
Good evening, Commissioners. Yes, so our jurisdiction is, if we get a radio call, that's our reasonable suspicion to enter the property and make an assessment. As Mr. Wolf stated, if there are 2 calls within a 24-hour period, we'll usually advise the homeowner or the lead of the party to shut down the party. But usually when we go there, we have them lower the noise, see if there's any underage juveniles, heavy drinking, etc. Yeah. So we make the assessment.
So it's mainly noise is what triggers in your experience?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. That answers my question.
Planner Wolf, when there's an event that's going to have alcohol served, does that require any special permitting as well?
If there's alcohol served by a vendor, we would ask that the vendor provide their license.
So, for example, I remember when we did the CUP for Sierra Madre Fusion, they wanted a full alcohol license because they're also operating as a caterer. So that catering license carries the alcohol license from their facility to wherever they're catering. And so they would have to be a caterer that has that kind of licensure.
That is correct.
Any other questions?
Right now.
Not right now.
All right, thank you. At this time, we invite any person to address the Planning Commission on this specific agendized item. The Commission welcomes your attendance and participation. When addressing the Commission, please begin by providing your name and address for the record. Please keep your comments to no more than 3 minutes to assure an orderly and timely meeting. Who's up first?
Joy Alvarez, Olive Avenue.
Good evening. Joy Alvarez, a part-time resident at 89 Olive Avenue. I'm a family member of the Brandstaters. Good evening, Sierra Madre Planning Commission. I've had the pleasure assisting the Brandstaters with several small events held at Lavender Marketplace. For example, small workshops and under 24 guest weddings. Usual attendance is actually between 5 to 15 guests. Most of these gatherings are held during the day for only roughly 1 to 3 hours and have been organized, respectful, and mindfully orchestrated. In addition, many visitors have brought their own flowers and food, thus only occasional deliveries are made. Lavender Marketplace visitors mind all the Brandstaters rules with grace, bearing in mind that their small gatherings are located in a residential neighborhood. It has been an honor to witness some of these joyful, peaceful gatherings whereby some people come together to celebrate significant life events surrounded by the beauty of Sierra Madre. Sadly, I've also witnessed some neighbors' displeasure with my cousin's small business. The Brandstaters have made many efforts to address their neighbors' concerns and made revisions to the rules to respectfully accommodate and, more importantly, acknowledge their neighbors' concerns. It is my understanding that 89 Olive Avenue is listed as an historical landmark of Sierra Madre, California, and is also situated within an R6 zone, which allows the operation of small, home-based businesses. Finally, I'd like to implore the City of Sierra Madre's Planning Commission members to kindly recognize that Lavender Marketplace events also positively contributes to its local economy by utilizing neighborhood merchants as vendors, in addition to the occasional patronage to our local restaurants and shops. Thank you so much for your time and consideration this evening.
Thank you, Ms. Alvarez.
Thank you.
Todd Delahook, West Miramonte Avenue.
Good evening. My name is Todd Delahook. My wife and I live at 99 West Miramonte, which is directly across the street from the Brandstater properties. We have not experienced any negative impact on our neighborhood, and we have not been inconvenienced from noise, parking, or disruption of any kind. On the contrary, we have spoken to rental guests from across the street that have been very courteous. We have not seen any parties at the rental house. The home-based business that they have is very limited, and events are small and infrequent. We have attended charitable events at their house and seen firsthand how they want to open up their historical home and gardens for residents to enjoy. We support having them in their business in our community, and thank you for your time and letting me share tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Delahook.
Kim Brandstater, Olive Avenue.
Good evening, Commission members. My name is Kim Brandstater, and I live at 89 Olive Avenue, which is Lavender Marketplace. Since 2022, we have drastically changed and downsized our business. These changes have addressed and eliminated any negative impact within the neighborhood. Despite our sincere attempts to take everybody's considerations into account and create something that helps others, a few refuse to accept our regard and insist on shutting us down with slanderous and false data. We can see that they're having an emotional response to the way our business was conducted in the past. The data submitted has been subjectively falsified to mislead the council regarding the operation of Lavender Marketplace presently. Therefore, we strongly urge the council to make their decisions based upon our current circumstances. It is not fair to demand that we shut down based on significantly outdated observations. I wanted to respond to the unfounded claims made against us. For example, the claims suggest that we currently have large, extravagant events, that there are noise and lighting issues, that we've had vendors coming and going all the time, that we've had porta potty deliveries, that our street is unsafe for kids to play on due to our business, that we have a lot of filming here, and that we've also been falsely accused of destroying Sierra Madre, being a detriment to the city, and that we're getting rich at the expense of our neighbors. None of this information is true, and false accusations like these have led us to review everything and give a detailed rebuttal to the city. We find these concerns to be unwarranted and a misrepresentation of the small religious gatherings and events we host. Contrary to the biased article in the Mountain Views News from March 16th, we are not a traditional commercial business because we do not have signage, we do not operate as a storefront, or we don't give tours to the general public, nor do we have pedestrian traffic. We do operate by appointment only. We have infrequent paid and non-paid gatherings for 24 or less. We always try to minimize street parking. We don't allow loud music or DJs, and 5 months out of the year, we do not host any events. Tonight, we're seeking support for our home-based business, which has been a vital source of income for our family and provides for the continued maintenance and restoration of this historic property. We request the right to continue our business with some modifications of having up to 24 guests and also to be able to have the 4 TUPs a year if we choose to do so. We are honored to be able to share our historic home and gardens with the residents of Sierra Madre while partnering with nonprofit charities and other local small businesses. Our family will always be committed to opening our home to the community. Thank you.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
These smaller events, you say unpaid, are some of these just gatherings with your church and are not business ventures?
Over the years, we have had many, like the Creative Arts Group tour, we've had the Methodist Holiday Home Tour, we've had church events, we've had private graduation parties, birthday parties for our children. We have given weddings for free to members of the community, even the pastor of our church. It was a free wedding for him. So we have multiple things at our house.
And those aren't commercial at all?
No,
Okay.
no. Any other questions?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Steve Rosker, Olive Avenue.
My name is Steve Rosker. I live at 65 Olive. I came here to talk about the TUPs and the 25 or less exemption. I spoke in front of the council 10 days ago, I believe it was, 12 days ago. The handouts, well, what I would like to address is the handouts because I think it comes to the core of the issue right here. Should there be commercial activities in an R1 zone? City attorney has said no. Council has acknowledged that. The 25 or less exemption is what the Brandstatters are, as Kim just said, hoping to continue to do. Our position is that because there's no commercial allowed, there should be no TUPs, not even 4 times a year, because that's for special events, for non-commercial in an R1 zone. And so on the first page is the Brandstatters application for a TUP that was issued last October. In October, and it was to be held for a large wedding. And on this business application that Kim signed in August, it asks, it's been highlighted, what is your past involvement? And it's spelled, you can read for yourself. It is our business since 2017. They're in a business to hold weddings there. That is not to be allowed. Page 2 is dated October 27th, 2022, and this is the approval sent by the previous planning commissioner Gonzalez, giving them approval for a permit wedding September 30th, 2023. That was either on the day that the new ordinance went into effect or after, according to what Josh presented earlier, it went into effect on the 13th. But this was issued then, and as Josh Wolf told me, that they did not have to give out a notice to the public, a 300-yard notice. So the neighborhood on Olive and on Miramonte was kind of blindsided when they had this large party. We called it in, and the code enforcement or police responded. But basically, the bottom line is, then Josh told me later, oh, they did have a TUP. So the point of this is that we feel like these, whether it's for Lavender or whatever, that the notice should be continued to be mailed out to everybody. Otherwise, the neighbors don't really know what's going on. And so whether the fee is exorbitant or not, I think Josh Wolf brought it up in the council meeting. It should probably be waived. But one way or the other, we're in favor of keeping the notice. The last page is the code for 1458, and it talks about TUPs can be issued under the temporary use as a reasonable use of land. And this is to be determined solely by the planning commissioner. Previously it was Gonzalez, and he's now gone. Claire Lynn is doing a great job and is taking that place. Reasonable use of a land per the zone. And it is not a reasonable use of land in our R1 zone neighborhood. It may be to the Brandstatters, but it is not to the rest of the neighborhood. It also says...
Thank you, Mr. Rosberg.
Is my time up?
It is.
Sorry, ran out.
Thank you.
I apologize if I mispronounce this. Smrekar? Olive Avenue.
Thanks. So I have a couple of questions. Are those part of my time? I have a question.
For public comment, we're not allowed to interact with the public because it's not necessarily part of an agendized topic. So we're supposed to just listen, not really interact or ask questions.
Okay. Well, the question I would ask would be, what is a sensitive property? Is that meant to be, a historical property? That's not well defined, and it's unclear as to what you're trying to propose in that statement. And I'm also puzzled by the idea that commercial is ill-defined. Commercial is, to me, for profit. You can find that definition, and clearly there are many things that are being done on this property for profit. So I think the challenge is when they say, oh, this is for free, and, well, we did this as a philanthropic activity. So, that really leaves us in a bad position. We don't know. We've been left to police all of these things. We don't get, support because these things are on the weekend. And how are we to determine, is it commercial or is it not commercial? That's a real challenge for all of us, right? And so, I think that there are already rules on the book for what kind of business is allowed in an R1, right? It's not outdoors. It's not parking on the street. You have to have parking in your property. Sierra Madre already has rules that govern what is allowed for home businesses. And those rules are not being enforced. They're for good reason. Why should people be able to have for-profit business outside where it interacts with their neighbors? I don't understand why the rules are not being enforced as they are already on the books. And, they clearly are a business. They're on social media. They advertise on social media. They reach out, to say that it's I don't understand why there's even a question as to whether it's a business or not, and why it's still being permitted. So, we've been putting up with this for 5 years. Yes, it has been scaled back, but, we've seen an effort to get around every rule that's come up. And we are really just fed up with having our neighborhood become like a commercial part of a city. I mean, would you like to live next to a party business? I certainly do not like not knowing when there's going to be a party for profit in the yard next to mine. It's very unsettling, and you know, the neighborhood overall is really fed up with having to put up with this. And it seems that Sierra Madre is just not standing up and enforcing their own rules. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much.
L.M. Jobson, East Montecito Avenue.
Good evening. My name is L.M. Jobson. My husband and I own a business at 61 East Montecito Avenue, and I am here to support Lavender Marketplace. The Lavender Marketplace is a beautiful addition to the charming small town of Sierra Madre. It tells an exciting story that connects with the city's foundation. The Brandstaters have a deep appreciation for arts, history, and the legacy of Sierra Madre, and this is evident through their work. As valuable members of the community, Kim and Justin have generously given their time and money to support various local causes, including programs and outreach, local churches, and businesses. People like the Brandstaters are the backbone of a community, and their contributions are crucial to its success and growth. Unfortunately, they have been targeted by less than a handful of folks who seem to have a grudge and are spreading erroneous and deceptive information. As a local business owner, this concerns me. In 2022, the city made changes, and by the council's own accord, these regulations and codes put Sierra Madre in line with surrounding communities. The Brandstaters have checked off all the marks and are operating within the guidelines. They have never purposefully tried to circumvent or overstep the restrictions. On the contrary, they have a couple of friends or family over and photos are taken. Guests are badgered and the police are called. They turn on their outdoor string lights and are being blamed for flooding their neighbors with lights. Someone laughs or plays music on their property, and it is called noise pollution. A delivery truck drops off some flowers, just as Amazon drops off a package at your home, and it is called excessive. Choice words such as destroying Sierra Madre, determining or detriment to the city, and getting rich are being used. The landscape is changing. We have all witnessed these changes through recent experiences. The dynamics of our neighborhood are changing too. More folks are building ADUs, working from home, creating home-based businesses. Home delivery, Uber and Lyft, DoorDash, and Instacart are active within our residential streets. State law has changed R1 zoning, reflecting these new landscapes. And Sierra Madre needs to get in front of this before more tension is created in the community. Amidst all the chaos and uncertainty, one thing remains clear. The importance of human connection and community has only grown stronger. Lavender Marketplace is the perfect blend of building a meaningful community and creating connections. The Fletcher House is unique, historic landmark, and Kim and Justin Brandstater have taken care of this home and this landmark meticulously, and I support Lavender Marketplace. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right.
Kathleen Murray, Liliano Drive.
Hello, I'm Kathleen Murray, resident of Sierra Madre for 10 years. As a family moving to Sierra Madre from the East Coast, we were so attracted to Sierra Madre for its small town, friendly, and uniquely creative community. Sierra Madre residents truly appreciate unique places like Mary's Market, E. Waldo Ward and Sons, the Monastery, Haracha Farms Urban Farm, and of course, Lavender Marketplace. This community is built on a respect for nature, creative endeavors, and also shares a deep love of beautiful historic homes and buildings. We are so blessed to have a family like the Brandstanders that appreciate our history, culture, and have spent years pouring into our special town and giving back to our community. It saddens me that the voices of a few are louder than the majority of neighbors who are in support of or even unaware that any small business is going on at this home. I know Kim and Justin to be hardworking and earnest people who are truly interested in bettering our community. I have personally witnessed how they have maintained the parameters and guidelines set before them and even went above and beyond to be sure there is no violations. Their home is a true treasure. Kim and Justin lovingly and meticulously cared for their historic family home where they raised their 3 children. It is a great privilege to have the opportunity to take a small pottery class or be invited to attend an intimate wedding or a baby shower. I am grateful they are willing to share it with others. Lavender Marketplace is a treasure, not a deficit. I love how they have been a conduit for connecting artists all over the city and in the larger San Gabriel Valley. They have also raised money for charities and hosted Chamber of Commerce meetings. I appreciate you allowing me to share with you tonight, and I hope you will take the time to consider how they are currently living and conducting their special small business, and also how they're just trying to live their life and have normal parties like we all would like to do. So I hope that you consider how much they do contribute to our community, and it's special gems like this that make Sierra Madre unique. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Murray.
Burt Willis, Olive Avenue.
Hello, my name is Burt Willis. I live at 83 Olive. I'm the next door neighbor to the Lavender Marketplace. You know, I've heard these people characterize the Lavender Marketplace as being this wonderful thing, but I'll tell you, as a neighbor, they're not as wonderful as they've been portrayed. They've never informed us of up-and-coming events. You know, and every time they take advantage of public street in front of our houses, I can't use them. You know, they're not available for the rest of the neighborhoods. They've done it so often, it's very, very obnoxious. I want to thank the City Council for the Planning Commission to give me this opportunity to speak. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Willis. Would anybody else like to come up and speak on this specific agendized item? All right. I guess we will turn it back to the Planning Commission for deliberation now. Anybody want to go first?
Could I ask a few more questions of staff?
Sure.
So my questions have a little bit to do, because I'm just trying to fill in the blanks for myself of the history of this thing. So there was mention of 2017 being where their business started, or something to that effect. So what was happening at this property before that?
So actually, I guess we should get some clarification, because we're not actually here to discuss an individual property.
Yes.
But the overarching code.
That's right. We're discussing the TUP ordinance. If you'd like to talk about a specific use under TUP, that's totally fine, but I'd suggest refraining from naming or talking about a specific person or business or property.
Okay.
If you would like to
what's the
speak
point?
about
Like, what do you-
Well, I have a couple of questions, and maybe you can collect your thoughts.
Okay.
One that I didn't ask. So, any event where there's less than 25 people, the code changed last August or something? I mean, I wasn't privy to that.
Yeah, what's the history of the code and what it enforced?
Because what I'm getting at is that there seems to be this unlimited ability to have less than 25 people. And that started back, we heard about in September. So update me on what the current law is, because I don't know.
So the ideas around the exemptions for small events and house parties came with intention to exempt certain gatherings that commonly take place and spread wide, such as Thanksgiving or Super Bowl Sunday, at which point it would overburden staff to issue temporary use permit to every resident who would want one on those days.
What I'm getting at is, are these paid events, or just someone has a bunch of people over and puts big screens out in their backyard and has people over to watch the game? Because I've been to events in Pasadena and other places where people, it's not commercial. So you're saying that would be the exemption, but if it was a commercial event where they were actually trying to make money?
So I think what we need to discuss is that the way the code was written, it did not speak to the nature of the exemptions for 25 or less.
Correct, that's what I want to clarify.
It does not,
There's no clarification. So, is that correct, Josh?
Correct. So the interpretation between the two exemptions, small events and house parties, was that house parties specifically mentions non-commercial. So the interpretation, therefore, to the small gatherings was that it did not have to be non-commercial.
Did not have to be non-commercial.
Could be commercial, said otherwise.
The exact wording's on page 18 of our agenda. Small events, gatherings of less than 25 people. House parties, private, non-commercial gatherings of up to 75 people.
Yeah, I get it. These are the exemptions. So that's fine. I read the language, but I'm just saying that changed as of last year, correct?
As of October 2022.
Okay. 22 to 22. That was okay. But there's also a specific stipulation that these are, if they're house parties, that it's implied they're going to be inside, or does it not matter?
It's not explicitly stated.
Okay.
Maybe related, since we weren't, at least I wasn't party to this discussion, was the intent, it sounded like the intent with the small events was, you know, these Thanksgivings or Super Bowl parties, but those are all non-commercial anyway. Was the intent to leave that loophole for commercial uses of under 25 people?
So I was a commissioner at that time, so I think I can speak to that.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
That was not the intent. Our intent was not to leave a loophole that allowed commercial events. The idea was that, and I think that he is correctly citing examples that we specifically used in our deliberation, was that Super Bowl, Thanksgiving, birthday parties where you have 3 big families over would be these small gatherings that are completely exempt. That was the intention of what we wrote. And I think that, or that was with the intention of what we had drafted. And I think that in hindsight, we could have done a better job drafting it.
So then, if both 1 and 2, small events and house parties, read gatherings of less than X people and non-commercial, why do you even need those 2 separate things then? Like, once you put non-commercial next to small events, then it's a subset of house parties.
I think that we had assumed that small events would be considered non-commercial family type gatherings, and that when you started getting larger families together, that it became a house party. It's a nuance without a distinction.
But I'm just saying, why, like, then you could just say house parties, private, non-commercial gatherings of up to 75 people were allowed.
You could completely remove number 1 and do a ton of cleanup there.
Okay, so that's what I would suggest.
But
I could just interrupt and maybe I can reframe the discussion a bit. There are 2 questions. The first is the broader question, which I think could be answered first, and maybe that would help lead to the other questions. The first question is, can a TUP allow a commercial use in a residential zone? Because if so, then a commercial use in a residential zone either needs a TUP or another CUP that allows the commercial use. The exemptions can be worked on and need to be worked on for both if the TUP can allow a commercial use and if the TUP cannot allow commercial use. So I think starting with the big question, can a TUP allow commercial use? That would help kind of guide the discussion a bit.
So currently as it stands, the only way you can have a commercial gathering in an R1 is through a TUP or a CUP. Is that correct? And
That's
without that, you are not permitted to.
That's correct.
And there's also the question of how do we define commercial, right? Is that
Yes.
something that we also need to discuss as well?
Yes, yeah.
But the exemption is, there's an exemption for groups under 25.
She's suggesting we discuss the exemptions
Well, that's
after.
that was my point, because I was there too, Tom. So
I
it's
know.
not like I wasn't ignoring it. I'm just trying to clarify that we left this wide open,
Yeah.
and that's where we're at. Okay.
Yeah.
But in your discussions, I mean, I can't defer what you were thinking, but I mean.
No, nobody even, I don't think anybody envisioned that there would be some commercial event for people under 25. We were trying to make it so that people wanted to have parties at their house, that we were imagining the obvious would be, not be burdened with, permitting and noticing and everything else, or be conceived that it would become a commercial, and,
Yeah.
Agreed.
And so that's the history on it. And so where we are today is, and so where we are today is that we need to decide if we think that the TUP is the right vehicle to allow commercial activities in residential zones. And I think that we should probably, if we do decide that, we should look at all the residential zones, because there's like 6 different residential zones, and we should make sure that we're aligning for each of those zones individually or globally, right? Not half and half like we're doing today. So I think that's an opportunity for cleanup. But fundamentally, I think one of the questions that we have to deal with is if we're saying that, so there's basically, as I understand it, and city attorney can correct me please, but there's 2 vehicles by which you can have today a commercial anything in a residential zone. And that is the TUP, which is for short little instances of it, and the CUP, which is you can do it forever. So if we close the loophole, so my concern of closing the loophole totally on the TUP is that then the only option that is open to people is to have a CUP, which lasts forever. And so no matter what changes around that CUP, we no longer have purview of it because we've already granted it. And so the TUP is kind of the scalpel rather than using a hammer. Is that a fair description of what we have before us?
Yes, that's completely right. There are 2 ways to really change the use on a property, and that's a CUP and a TUP. And the TUP is, like you said, a short-term, temporary use change. So if no TUP, then CUP only would allow a commercial use. Right now, for commercial use in residential zones, for a CUP, we have the home occupation permit, is that right? And the, I always forget the second. The adaptive reuse permit.
Right. Which the adaptive reuse, because I've heard it, so you can change it into a bed or a breakfast, and similar to the entrepreneurial zone, I believe the entrepreneurial zone currently allows you to have accountants, attorneys, brokers, doctors, dentists, optometrists, chiropractors, and other practicing the healing arts for human beings and accessory uses such as medical labs and occultists. I don't even know what that means. Oculists, thank you.
Occultist.
I was close. Engineers, architects, planners, real estate agencies, and similar uses, so very professional offices that somebody would be operating, right?
So for the CUP is very, very specific way to achieve a commercial use in a residential zone, whereas the TUP is a lot broader. As it stands now, it can be a kind of variance on the use for whatever the planning director sees that fits the findings for a TUP.
So let me ask you this. If, so the TUP currently, if it weren't for the TUP as it is written, then anybody could have any number of parties all year long at any size at their house.
No, because if there's no TUP, then the only use that's allowed is a residential, is the use allowed under the R1 or R2 zone. And as Josh pointed out, technically under the residential zone, R1, there can only be one family in the house at all times.
Okay.
So you couldn't even have like friends over.
Right. And you wouldn't be able to sell your house because that would be
Yeah, people would have to
realtors coming
tour
through
it.
your house, right? So there, I mean, I think that there are, okay, so I guess fundamentally we have to decide as a body whether or not we think that commercial use should be allowed under a TUP. And then we can decide after that what we think that is.
What commercial is.
Well, I mean, I think, yes, we could define commercial if it's not already defined somewhere in the code. I've seen it used as a term, so I would be surprised if it's not well defined.
It's not defined.
It's not defined anywhere in the code?
No.
It's used all throughout the commercial zone, but,
It can, so commercial use under the TUP, you can connect it to, you know, commercial activity allowed in the commercial zone, but that's not, I think, as broad as what somebody would imagine as a commercial generally.
right,
If I
okay.
may.
So I guess, oh, sorry, go ahead.
So commercial uses are defined in the commercial zone, and there is a director's list of commercial uses.
Right.
There are certain types of uses that are not defined in that, where they're not defined anywhere else in the code.
Right.
That do operate.
Right. And Bill and I spent a lot of time earlier going over that monstrosity of a list and trying to take it out of a very delineated list into code that would be able to change over time, right? So, yeah, I thank you. I still have nightmares about that. So I guess the fundamental question to start with is, do we want to allow commercial uses in residential zones via the TUP? So maybe we can start the discussion there.
Can I ask a question of staff? What are some other examples, other than some of the marketplace examples that we've heard tonight, of commercial use under TUPs ongoing?
I could not speak to what uses permitted by a temporary use permit are commercial, just because we don't have standard for that definition.
Got it.
But there are birthday parties, weddings, wedding ceremonies, celebrations of life. There is the one in the commercial zone across the street, the pop-up nursery, St. Rita's Harvest Festival, the British Homes June Fair.
I'm thinking more, I know you gave some of those examples before. I think the closest to what I'm thinking is the pop-up nursery, you know, something that's more of what you might traditionally think of as a business versus kind of an event.
Filming with greater than 5 people, right? And then that's governed both by a TUP and a filming permit.
Yeah, but even the filming's more of like a pop-up thing versus, I don't know, like a nursery I think of as more of almost a business.
If I could give an example that I just learned about, the Whiskey and Wine Festival might be a similar event.
Mhm.
It's a fundraiser in a residential zone.
So it seems like, to me, most of what we're talking about are pop-up events that happen to be fundraisers or making profit. terms of how the TUP is
I would
being
put
used
those in
commercially.
very different terms, though. I would say that I wouldn't necessarily consider a fundraiser a commercial event, whereas when somebody is profiting from what's going on there, I would consider that a commercial event.
What if somebody's running for something and they're raising money? What is that considered?
It's not nonprofit.
That might be actually a protected event. There's a carve out in the code for protected First Amendment events, and so I bet that's one of the First Amendment events. So we don't have to discuss that.
Good answer. I like it.
How about, what is, Mary's Market has a CUP, correct? Operates on a CUP? It's a full-time business.
100 years. Do we have a CUP?
Yeah, that one I'm not so sure.
They were here before everybody.
I would have to look into it, but I do know that it is named specifically in the general plan as a historic commercial use in the canyon zone.
So is the exemption historical? That's, okay, well, that would.
Well, I mean, it's named specifically in the specific plan, right? So if the specific plan says that you can do it, then we actually have to allow it, right?
General plan would encourage its continued use.
Right. You either have to modify the general plan or allow code to support it, which is why we had to change a bunch of coding on the Baldwin, right, to match the general plan.
Do we think that pop-up for-profit events could use a CUP? I know it's forever, but does it even make sense if like a whiskey festival applied? for
It's
a
no longer a
CUP?
pop-up, then they can do it all the time, unless there are special,
But wouldn't it just be denied then, because that doesn't make any sense?
yes.
Yeah,
So
they're
Yeah.
pretty
the-
restrictive, yeah.
Yeah, so the effect, if we could decide, if we decide not to allow for-profit under TUP, we are essentially deciding not to allow pop-up for-profit events at all.
Or we're limiting it to commercial areas.
Yeah, I mean, in residential zones.
Right, so like the pop-up's actually in both the commercial zone and Measure V, right? So the one
Yeah,
across the street. So that one, I think, is kind of a little bit apples to oranges, but,
But I'm saying if we decide not to allow for-profit under the TUP, what we are essentially deciding is not to allow any for-profit pop-up events in residential zones, because those events wouldn't be approved anyway under a CUP.
it depends on how we draft the TUP, because I think the TUP says that there's a carve-out in certain zones. So you're excluded from needing it if you're in the commercial zone, right?
Yes, you're excluded in Measure V.
Yes.
Yeah,
if you're
so
in-
I was saying that just not in the residential zones.
So I guess, so are you saying, is there a recommendation in there?
It's just
Just
like following all
deliberation?
the logic symbols
Yeah.
to their conclusion
Yeah.
that the question is, do we want to ban pop-up for-profit events in residential zones? That question is equivalent to, do we want to ban commercial uses under the TUP?
Well, I mean, I think pop-ups are one type, right? Pop-up markets, right? But there's a lot, I think there's probably other, I guess.
I mean, all the other events that he mentioned were either things that you seemed, or we seemed okay with, you know, like a fundraiser or something like that, or birthday parties, weddings, that sort of thing. So, you
Right.
know, to me, like the most, I don't know, exceptional thing to consider is whether we want those pop-up for-profit events to happen or not in residential zones.
So I guess a question for staff is if we allow applications to come in for commercial uses, but they generally always get denied, does that create a problem?
What do you mean?
So I guess, so here's what I'm trying to solve for, and maybe I'm trying to solve for too many things, but the world around us has changed much faster than our code changes. And so I could imagine commercial uses that don't affect anybody, that people would want to grant a TUP for, that we're not thinking about, and the code will be way behind. And so I'm not necessarily fond of allowing commercial uses in the residential zone, but this is today our only variance to the code to allow that. So how would we structure practically a code that is very, very selective in what is allowed?
So you could add findings. That would be a big way
Findings,
to
okay.
Narrow the kinds of events that can use a TUP, commercial events. And I didn't think about this before, but maybe you could have findings for TUPs for commercial events and findings for TUPs for non-commercial events. Something like that.
Yeah, that might be an elegant solution to that.
So we're back to the laundry list then.
Well, I think if I'm understanding what Madam City Attorney's saying is that we don't have to put together the laundry list of here's what's okay. We have to put together the laundry list of here's what can't happen during the event.
Oh,
Right.
activities.
So the findings would be, if it'd come back to the Alverno conversation, candidly, right?
Okay.
It'd be no noise after this time. It would be all those kind of findings that we could put in place
Okay.
to limit the scope of the activity, but not delineate what the activity is. Am I thinking about that right? Yeah.
So yeah, in 10 years, if people are having like a virtual dance party and like, virtual reality and everything's completely silent at their house, it's not impacting the neighborhood. We never listed that in our list because who would, but because of the findings, they would be allowed or not allowed to have it.
Yeah.
As long as they don't scream.
Yeah, well, I think, the other thought I had was because it's gonna be a changeable thing, that if we do start putting into our conditions certain ideas, whether it's a specific activity or not, that we make it so it's modifiable and can be updated, just like we have with the other the TUP for like Alverno, if you're talking, so it's reviewable, so somebody can say, hey, we'd like to do this next year, and then get it, either grandfathered in or changed so the conditions, because if we try and limit the conditions, again, you're gonna end up, like you said, the virtual reality dancing. It's like, you could do that at home and connect, virtually, right? So why show up? But that would be something I wouldn't have thought of, right? But it'd be almost like a living document, or at least a living process, so that we can adapt it as we go along, because just like we've seen with the housing, we've had to make changes like on the fly. How many meetings have we had where we have to just update our general code to match state law? There may be another law that comes along, and now we're gonna have to take the rug and just rearrange everything. But I like the start of the structure of putting in conditions that seem to give us some broader play without, hampering people from having, like you said, open house at their house so that people can't come by because there's too many people parked up front or something like that.
Yeah.
Just one clarification, there's no conditions to the TUP like in a CUP, but there are findings that the director or the planning commission would make before granting the permit.
Right.
So the findings would be also at the director's level, right? But that's what we're giving her as the
Yeah,
guidance.
you can add those.
Well, we could do either. The other thing we could do is say that only commercial TUP requests come before the commission, and non-commercial TUPs are ministerial. So that then we would only see the commercial requests come before us if that's what we wanted to do.
Do we really want to see all of those?
I don't have a sense, well, because there's no definition of commercial versus non-commercial, they can't even comment on how many that would be.
But it seems like it would maybe, just guessing, be the for-profit weddings and, you know, the for-profit festivals, kind of for-profit pop-up events. Seems like it would be the majority of things. And some of them might be for-profit recurring events, like maybe they have this festival every year, and others might be for-profit non-recurring, like 4 weddings or something. Different folks.
So are we generally aligned that we want to keep a TUP process and change the way that we handle commercial events versus non-commercial events?
Yeah, I think I'm leaning towards the idea of having a commercial event in a residential, and I'm thinking, of course, of, you know, for example, of myself, and if it happened to me kind of thing, you know, I would not want that to happen, right? So I think we try to exclude that, and so we try to put some hoops before that they have to pass through, right, to get our approval, and that's kind of what the TUP is. I'm kind of torn because I'm never for putting more, you know, written legislation on trying to create this whole, you know, web of, if you go here, you go there, and you know, like, it just confuses the hell out of everything. But because now this is in front of us that we can't mention, I guess we do have to create this other, you know, way of distinguishing that.
We don't have to. We can say that we could say, I mean, that's on the table. We could say that no commercial events are allowed in the residential zone and define what commercial events are. That is our,
right.
That is an option.
Commissioners, if I may, I don't believe profit is something that staff can verify, so it would have to be a statement of the applicant that staff would have to trust. Whether
right, or we tie it to nonprofit status.
Correct.
If you're a registered 501c3 or 501c, whatever the list are of not-for-profit organizations that are registered with the state, that would be a way to delineate.
That can be verified, yes.
Makes it tough.
May I also add, do then we assume all entities which are not nonprofit are therefore for-profit?
Yeah, no, I understand the challenge of what you're saying about validating it. I mean, if people are going to lie on a sworn affidavit, they're going to get around this code some way or the other, right? And eventually they'll get hit on the enforcement side, would be the hope. I don't think that the challenge in writing the language should prohibit us from trying to establish what the spirit is, I guess is what I'm saying.
I think I'm okay with keeping the stuff that we have on board, but we better define what the usage of the TUP would be. Yeah.
Okay, so then, if I'm summarizing, I'm hearing that we're okay with the idea of allowing for commercial uses in residential zones so long as they are with a TUP, and that we want to rewrite the code to reflect that.
So then by saying that, we're saying that the under 25 cannot be a commercial.
We're not saying any of that yet.
But we
We will be. Okay, got it.
We will have an option to revisit that. We will be rewriting the code, so. Okay, so then it sounds like we have consensus on that. So we've answered the first question. We think we're okay with leaving commercial occurrences inside the residential zone subject to CUP, and that we're gonna wanna.
And TUP.
Sorry, TUP. Yes, thank you. Subject to a TUP, and that we wanna rewrite that portion of the code.
And then their recommendation was staff, it seemed like, to form a subcommittee to do this.
So,
rather
yeah,
than
so there's
trying to
multiple
do-
ways we can do this. We can we can give guidance to staff and ask staff to take a pass at it, or we can form a subcommittee and write the code ourselves and then send it to staff and city attorney to tell us that we're not lawyers and clean it up. And then we would all, one way or the other, we're all gonna have to look at code and go line by line as Planner Wolf cuts and pastes for us up on the big screen. So it's just a matter of how we want to get there.
I think we direct staff to come up
Yeah.
with something, and then we review it. That's my-
Okay, so we will get back from staff what we help guide from staff.
Okay.
So we have to give very clear instructions as to what it is that we're looking for if we want staff to work on it.
I just want to be on a subcommittee. And we'll volunteer Pat while he's not here.
Pat's not here, and
Subcommittee
I'm
of
happy.
one.
Yeah, no, so we haven't written much code of late, but when I first joined, we were writing code all the time, and the subcommittee was a really effective way.
So you're saying you're a good
So I
code-
will volunteer actually to lead a subcommittee on rewriting, taking a first pass at this. And we can, since Pat's not here to say no, we can volunteer him for it, and if he doesn't participate, that's fine. We just can't have more than 2 members on it.
I nominate Pat.
Yeah, seconded.
All right, so then I guess it sounds like we have a nomination to have a subcommittee of myself and Commissioner Simcock to take a pass at rewriting. I was gonna look for this. Oh, where did it go? Oh, it's on here.
Is that a motion?
Yes, there was a motion and a second, and so I'm clarifying the motion.
If I could add to the motion that the subcommittee is advisory only. It is for a limited duration and limited scope, just until the subcommittee can create suggestions for the Planning Commission to revise the TUP ordinance.
With those friendly amendments, we've got a motion and a second, friendly amendment. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion passes.
And Chair Dennison, if the Planning Commission would like to keep discussing the other parts of the ordinance that Planner Wolf brought up, maybe we could bring up those questions that you had on the slide so that
The
Planning
eight.
Commission could.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah, the bullet
just
point.
because we formed the committee, I would love to get some input. And I have questions about what we're actually thinking so that we're just not, you're thinking one thing and we bring back something completely different. So I guess when we look at the code as it is, like what are the things that so a couple of things. I think we're saying that commercial, do we want them to get referred? I think that we should, at a minimum, even if we decide that commercial TUPs should be directed to the planning department for adjudication, that they should always have the right to refer them up to us. That's the way
that
that we,
makes sense, yeah.
that's the way that we do most of them, so that they can always, if it's something that's
But
really.
not a requirement, just.
Not a requirement,
The right,
right.
yeah, I think that
If they
makes sense.
if they think that it should be something, we should.
If it's something that they're hearing a lot in the community of fervor around, they may want to refer it to us rather than making that decision at a staff level, and that should always
That
be their
makes
right.
sense, yeah.
Okay. As far as as we look at what the exemptions are today, is there, I guess the more fundamental question is determining what is commercial versus non-commercial.
I mean, this starts to include nonprofits as well, which I think could conceptually be okay, but we could define it as collecting any money for the event.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, so, yes, there's always the letter of the law and then the enforcement side, right? And so I think we should write it with both in mind, but we shouldn't back down on doing the right thing, just knowing that it could be difficult to enforce it.
But I mean, like the sniff test, like weddings, you're usually not collecting any money. I guess people do bring gifts, but not.
Well,
Give some money, I don't know.
yeah, I mean, and we can write it, I would think that something to do with, that the owner of the property is not receiving inducements for use of the property, that we can look at other languages like that. And maybe inducements is the right word, but look at language about ensuring
It feels
that.
to me like it's not really even the fact that they might be getting money. It's the frequency of it, it's the annoyance of it, and it's all of that, right? That gets into the point of
The
'cause if,
intensity
like
of
my
use.
neighbor had a wedding and whatever they wanted to do it. If it's a one-time thing and it happens, then I'll probably be okay with it, right? But it's
Right.
if it kept happening, then I maybe would.
Right, so I think
it's
that.
the frequency part of it.
So I think that there's probably almost like a tiered frequency limit, right? So for commercials, maybe you're only allowed one commercial event a year. If it's the parties that are greater than 75 people but are non-commercial, currently we somehow randomly decided at 4. So I think that if it's a commercial event, it may be a much lesser frequency than if it's a non-commercial event, but I think that we should keep limits on both. I don't think we should just open up the floodgates.
Yeah, like 2 for commercial and maybe keep, I don't know about 4, maybe just keep the 4 for non-commercial, because I mean, the only time I remember it happening in my neighborhood was a huge property he kept having these events at his house, which had people parked all the way down the street, and I kind of live in the canyon, so people were everywhere. And, I mean, they were only 4 a year, and so, or less than that, I don't think there was even 4, but I just remember when they had a couple, they were pretty extensive, and I don't know if they had a commercial TUP or what they used at the time, but if it's if it's private, I think we should probably have a little more flexibility, because chances are you're not gonna have 4 big block party, I mean, something like that. If it's something where you're raising money, then yeah, it should be limited, so you're not making, buying a property and then trying to monetize it by having a commercial, events at your property to sustain the viability of the purchase of the property, for instance, something like that.
Yeah. All right, so Planner Wolf, you had some questions that you wanted us to contemplate?
Bullet points here.
Well, the suggestions would be first to how to address the exemptions for small events and house parties, determine whether commercial uses may be permitted and to what extent.
Yeah, so I guess the first bullet point.
Small events.
Yeah, so as far as addressing the exemptions for small events and house parties, I mean, I think what we heard was that likely removing the small events and keeping that number at 75 cleans all that up.
With the caveat that we haven't really defined non-commercial, but we can worry about that elsewhere.
Yeah, we'll have to figure out the definition of, we'll take a pass at what non-commercial, or what commercial versus non-commercial is, and how to define that in an objective way. But if we remove commercial, then on the non-commercial side, I don't think there's a need for small events versus house parties.
Yeah, you can just strike the number 1.
Okay, and then determine whether temporary commercial use is permitted by, yes, so that's,
We deliberated on that.
yeah, so we've deliberated on that, and the subcommittee can come back with a recommendation as to, 1, 2, how many events it is, and what that definition is.
The duration and frequency, and it seemed like we had a sense of allowing more frequent non-commercial versus commercial would be less frequent.
Right, and the standards for noise, lighting, and parking could all be handled in the findings as we add findings
I
to
feel
it.
like we have some examples from Alverno and other places, as you said, for that.
Are the findings codified?
Yes, they
Okay.
are in. They are in 1788-050.
Oh, yep, got it. Temporary use permit findings. Okay, so then we would look at updating that as part of this as well. Yeah, that's where the First Amendment applications are.
That's where they are.
Yeah.
Is that, what was that, 020?
1788-050. And then as we go down the road for commercial versus non-commercial, that would be where we could modify when an event monitor is required and when noticing is required. I know that there was, at the last city council, they wanted us to look at whether or not there should be waivers for different organizations for noticing so that those noticing fees don't apply. And I think that part of that solution may be as we delineate between commercial versus non-commercial.
So you're thinking maybe just noticing for the commercial?
Yes.
Fee for
Yes.
that?
Yep. That's something that we can look at, and the committee will come back with subcommittee will come back with some direction on that. But I know that was one of the things. I know that it's a flat rate, whether you have, I think I heard 13 houses or 23 houses, all are under the flat rate.
So the flat rate is based on the review body, administrative versus legislative body, like the planning commission or city council.
Sorry, I meant for the notification.
Yes.
So like the mailing for a TUP would be
Mailing for a
what, was
TUP
$429 or something like that?
About $20,
Okay.
and that's a flat rate fee for an administrative level of review. If it were elevated to the planning commission or city council, that would then be, I believe, an $820 fee.
Yeah. So if you have 13 houses you're notifying, it's $420 divided by 30. It's like $38 a house or something, right?
It's a lot, yes.
Okay, so then distinguish sensitive properties and create special standards for them. What do you mean by that? Help us understand what that is.
So sensitive property could be something that is, for instance, located in the high fire hazard severity zone, takes access from a restricted parking street, multiple variables which can distinguish it as a sensitive area where parking in relation to an event could impact neighbors.
So then, do you think that might be something in the findings that we would include?
I would suggest that they be very clear and objective rather than subjective based on staff determination.
Okay. And then codify a standard of condition. Yeah, so that's the conditions of approval that we were looking at. So, other thoughts that you would like the subcommittee to consider as they go into drafting? I think what I've heard is that we're thinking about bifurcating the code such that there's commercial and non-commercial. Non-commercial would have a lighter load, a lower threshold, maybe not have to notify, maybe not have to.
Right. Not as much of a burden.
Not as much of a burden.
Yeah.
Still a limited number, maybe the number that's there is 4 a year. That might be a number that we're okay with. And then on the commercial side, look at limiting that. Notifications probably do apply. Event monitors probably do apply the same way that we're holding other entities in town accountable for those kind of ordinances. Look and see how those would apply here. And then
So we're not totally eliminating it, but we're putting a little bit more.
right, we're not saying no, but we're saying there's some things that you need to adhere to if you do that, and here's also the findings that are used. Because,
That makes sense, yeah.
you know, the code does a good job, I think, of saying, here's a list of things for adaptive reuse of historic landmarks, right? That code is fairly well written, and I think we all understand very clearly what you can do as an adaptive reuse, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about actually doing, outside of that, business in a residential zone.
So,
So there should be a much higher threshold
Yeah.
for us saying, sure, you can do business in this residential zone.
so in some of the conversations tonight, I think we heard about some businesses that were maybe having events, say 10 people or so, clearly commercial. They were having some of those events under loopholes here where they weren't needing to pay any fees. I'm just considering the consequence of this. If they do have to pay, say, a $400 fee for each of those events, that's maybe $20 to $40 per person of just fees prior to any profits that that business would have for a small event like that. If I were that business, that would then incentivize me to have bigger events. If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And do it
And-
under a TUP, and
Which is
go
what we're
through the
trying to
process,
yeah.
but then what the consequence for the neighbors may be that we have maybe slightly fewer events, but they're much bigger because you have to justify the profit for that fee. And I don't know if that might be an unintended consequence of.
But I think what we're saying is we're putting more restrictions on, you need to have a noise monitor, you need to have, you know, those kinds of restrictions that they
Right.
would have to abide by, right?
Yeah, but I'm just saying, like, the neighbors, after we go through all this process, it sounds like we're putting more restrictions on, you know, for-profit use, and therefore that's a good thing. But the consequence may be that those places who are getting profit are incentivized to have larger events to amortize all the fees that they have to pay for.
Yeah,
Not
yeah,
having
that,
those loopholes anymore.
think
So
that's
then
what
the neighbors next year might be even more unhappy because, hey, now there's events of 100 people.
but the trade-off would be 1, 2 events a year,
Yeah, fewer events.
fewer events,
Yeah.
and a lot of these smaller ones, as you're pointing out, wouldn't be worth it.
Yeah.
So there wouldn't be every weekend these 25 people events.
Yeah. So
right?
you
The
just
50
have
people.
to, you know, think as a neighbor which one you want, like
Yeah.
frequent but small events or infrequent, potentially large and disruptive events.
I think that there's a fundamental expectation of residential use in the residential zones.
Yeah.
And that, at least that's what's kind of guiding me.
Yeah.
Yeah. and that's
Yeah,
what
I'm
the
not
party
necessarily
is about.
agreeing or disagreeing. I'm just like trying to think
no,
through all
you're-
the consequences.
Yes, we do always find out the unintended consequences,
Yeah.
don't we?
I agree, yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, anything else?
I'm good.
So, anything else?
How do we let Mr. Simcock, Commissioner Simcock, know about his subcommittee assignment without violating the Brown Act?
So, subcommittees are allowed to.
If you don't-
so
Talk to
as-
each
yeah,
other.
I can
Okay,
talk to
you
him.
can talk to him. All
We
right.
can't talk to anybody
Yeah,
else.
yeah.
You sure you want him to do it, or you want to let him off the hook? I mean, I'll volunteer if he decides he's been had.
It's up to you. Are we allowed to change the members so long as we don't have greater than 2?
If the planning commission as the quorum of the planning commission is okay with if switching out the members, that's fine.
Okay, so,
Yeah, because it's a little unfair to.
yeah, absolutely.
Like my running club, you don't show up, you're president.
That's right. Okay, so then, I don't think that, because I think we would have to have a draft to you in a week in order to get on the next one, right? So maybe we'll aim not for this one, but the one after it. I think that's the earliest, and so that would give us 3 weeks to get you the copy to agendize, is that right?
Yes,
Okay.
that would be good. And then we'll agendize as a public hearing.
Yes, because this was just a study session. Yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you for volunteering for that.
Yeah,
Well, we
Are
started.
you feeling guilty?
no, I dodged quite a few early when I was on the commission, and so I feel like now it's my turn to help.
I appreciate it.
All right, nothing else on that topic? All right, then we will move on to Planning Commission reports. Any planning commissioners have anything to report?
I don't.
All right, as we all know, the Form 700s are due by the end of the month, if you haven't already filled yours out.
I think they're
I'm sure
due
you'll
a
hear from
little
the city.
earlier than the end of the month. I feel like they're due the 26th.
Just have to send the copy in. I already,
Do it
I
online.
did it
It's
all,
pretty
yeah.
easy to do online.
Yeah, so I just have to bring in a copy like you said, so.
Yeah, if you've submitted it electronically,
Yeah.
just the confirmation email needs to go to city staff.
Okay.
I just have one thing. He's not here tonight. He was here last time. Bob Spears, who works on the trail diligently with volunteers,
Mhm.
has the trail in great shape. You know, the race is coming up for Mount Wilson, and we survived all the rains. There was very little damage because of the maintenance was done, and I think he just want to put a shout out of congratulations and to all the volunteers that helped in the city and people that use the trail, that everybody that congregates on the trail doesn't appreciate all the hard work that goes into it. So, and if you see some stuff in the trail that looks like building material, and you hear that somebody wants you to help transport it up there, feel free to volunteer and be a Sherpa.
Good job.
Thank you. Planning and Community Preservation Department reports.
Chair Dennison, so the next meeting will have a conditional use permit application for Emmy's Restaurant. That will be on the April 4th. Then the April 18th, we'll bring back the public hearing for the municipal code text amendment for the TUP, and also Alverno Heights Academy. There will be a annual review on their master plan conditional use permit.
Okay.
And I would like to announce I'll be gone on the 4th.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Spring break, huh?
We're going to the eclipse.
Oh,
Nice.
that's cool.
But it is also the elementary spring break.
All right, if there's nothing else, then we will go ahead and adjourn to our next regularly scheduled meeting of April 4th. Thank you.
Thank you.